What's going on, everybody? It's Jay here from Nerd Takes, and today I wanted to give you my take on Fallout, the TV series. Amazon recently released their Fallout TV series, and there's been a lot of talk about it, so I wanted to give it a watch and give my take on it as well. Heading into it, my expectations weren't very high. Amazon has created some solid shows like Reacher and Terminalist, but they've also given us stuff like Rings of Power, so it was kind of a toss up of whether or not this would end up being good. And with the general lack of success for most video game based series and movies added on top of that, the odds of success weren't necessarily in the show's favor. But having watched the first full season, I have to say I was pleasantly surprised with the product. I did, in fact, enjoy the show. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't have flaws, because it definitely does. And it's also not to say that it was a great show by any means, but I did find it to be solid overall and enjoyable. Now, before I go into breaking down what I liked and didn't like about the show, I do want to say that I personally went into this show with a very blank slate in terms of knowledge of the video games that it's based on. I have never actually played them. I'm generally aware of the premise of them from being a gamer for years and just kind of having that in the realm of things that I know and like. So I know of it and I know the premise of it, but I don't specifically know a lot about the lore or the details when it comes to that side of things. And from what I understand, there is a portion of the fan base that didn't care for the show based on ways that it may have messed with the lore of the games, specifically the Fallout New Vegas game. And to that, I say I totally understand that perspective. I get where those fans are coming from. I've had the lore of things that I really enjoy and that I know very well messed with in ways that didn't really make sense and left me displeased with the product. Most recently, an example of that would be the Netflix adaptation of Avatar: The Last Airbender. So I can absolutely relate to that feeling. However, in this case, I can only judge this show as a show, given that I have no in depth knowledge of the games. So that's more or less where this review is going to be focused. And I think even with its flaws, it did enough good things to sway the balance for me towards something I liked and would recommend. So, with that aside, to get into this breakdown, I first wanted to give a light spoiler free idea of what the premise of the show is for anyone who may not have seen it or is just unfamiliar with it. And it's a show that's basically centered around three main characters: Lucy, Maximus, and the Ghoul. It takes place over 200 years in the future in a post apocalyptic world that's become such as the result of a nuclear fallout. The three characters all take place in an intertwined journey that takes them through this wasteland setting, running into each other in different scenarios along the way while all trying to get after the same general objective. One of the first things that stood out to me as something that I liked was the characters of Lucy and the Ghoul. I thought Lucy was a very likable main character. There was a well done, naive nature about her, as she had lived her entire life in a vault underground, not really understanding the struggles of the world above her. This naive way about her would go on to not only create some pretty decent humor, but would play a big role in her character's development over the course of the season. She was a bit of a fish out of water, so to speak, in the world that she was put into, and needed to very quickly learn how to adapt and to understand this unfamiliar territory, while also trying not to lose her core self in the process, which I think overall was pretty well done. I thought Ella Purnell did a great job playing Lucy. She was charismatic, likable, capable, funny, and also flawed, which really made her character feel that much more relatable. And in contrast, I thought the Ghoul was another good character, but for pretty much opposite reasons. Walton Goggins did a great job in the role per usual. He had a difficult task of playing essentially two sides of this character, where he was the Ghoul in the present setting of the show, but also there were flashbacks and scenes to before the fallout in which he portrayed the man before the Ghoul, which was actor Cooper Howard. As a result, we got to kind of see the before and after of this person's life to get an idea of exactly what had happened over all this time, which had changed him from a kind hearted soul to a wasteland wandering ghoul. And in parts where he's with Lucy, it made for a really interesting dynamic to see her with her naive nature up against his hardened personality, given their very different lives to this point. The character of Maximus, I feel, unfortunately fell victim to some of the weak spots of writing in this show. I didn't think it was the fault of actor Aaron Moten. It just seemed like the writing of his character was a bit all over the place in kind of a back and forth type of way. In some moments, he's a bit weak and seems like his arc might be that he's going to grow strength over time. Then the next minute, he's kind of inexplicably a much stronger character. And then just as soon as that, he's back to weaker. And it just goes back and forth like that pretty much through the entire season. I think there's some potential to correct his character in the next season and make him more consistent. But as far as this one goes, it was a bit too back and forth in personality for me. I felt that the writing of the story was decent overall, but flawed. There were some logical flaws that take place in the story, some of which are right at the beginning and are kind of what sets everything in motion, but they weren't necessarily egregious enough that it ruined the good parts of the storytelling for me. I don't want to spoil the show or the viewing experience for anybody by going into detail, as this is a spoiler free review, but I will say that if you're paying attention, you'll likely catch most of these as well. One thing I can say, writing wise, that was a little odd but not spoiler territory is just how often people ran into one another. It seemed a little bit too convenient that the paths of these characters crossed as much as they did, given the size of the landscape that they were all traveling through. But generally speaking, I did enjoy the story overall, and I liked the character progression of Lucy and the ghoul quite a bit. I thought the look of the show was really well done. From the costume design to the set design and the cinematography, I thought everything looked great. Even for someone like me who's only vaguely familiar with the games, I was easily able to identify the jumpsuits, the vault, and things like that as Fallout themed. I really loved the look of the 1950s designs for the sets and the props, mixed in with the futuristic technology of the world. From what I've seen in the games, it seems like that was fairly accurate to what it should look like. And generally speaking, I just think that's a really cool look to see that contrast. Some of the cinematography I thought was top notch. We got some really cool looks at the world and nice uses of some slow panning camera methods that added a lot of style to the show. The music paired wonderfully with the aesthetic of the show. Again, that 1950s era music, which from what I understand is also in the game, just sounded so good and was used so well in this. It really helped create this kind of odd sci fi world that was both future and past at the same time. The pacing was definitely a bit slow at times, and I think is one of the main things I can point to and say that's a need to fix area going into season two. Some things just moved at a snail's pace and they really didn't need to, so I think tightening that up a bit would certainly benefit the next season. Overall, as I said earlier in the video, it's not a great show by any means, but it was a solid one that was fun to watch and took me by surprise. I would definitely recommend checking it out and seeing what you think about it. I think people who are unfamiliar with the games will enjoy it, as well as some people who are familiar with the games. I do think there is an understandable portion of the fans of the games who won't like the changes to the lore, and I totally get that. I think the one silver lining I could say to those fans is that the good thing is, I know for me personally, this show made me want to play the games. So it will ultimately lead me to experiencing those and to see what it is that makes them so great. And I think at the end of the day, that's always a good thing where more people will now go and experience those games and get to enjoy what it is that others have enjoyed for all this time. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll be back again with another review soon.